Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new episode of the Human Library podcast. This one is going to be about the shadow, our dark side, how to integrate it. We shortly touched upon it on the first episode, and we, as we promised, we're gonna elaborate on it a bit more in this one. And before we begin, just a quick housekeeping. As you may have noticed, Adriano, one of our co-hosts, is not here today. And obviously the reason is because...
And in the previous episode.
Yeah, and the previous one as well, yeah. And that the reason is obviously is because we're not doing this full-time. So we have jobs and lives outside of this. So he's on a work trip now, I believe. Right, yeah, so, and then the previous one, he was on a vacation, so he's going to join, not in the next one, no, like in the next few episodes,
maybe in the next one, we're still not sure.
All right, okay, so, yeah.
The main,
you want to add something?
Yeah, just the main idea behind this is just that we discussed as a team that nothing should stop us or sabotage us from producing content for the podcast. So we agreed if someone has a business trip or like working on something individually, I think the least we have as kind of like on our plates is one job each.
Yeah.
But we work on freelance projects. We're doing the podcast. I'm a photographer as well. So we are engaged in multiple projects. And this is just to mention that whenever there is a co-host missing, it doesn't mean that they're not on the podcast. It just means that they're busy doing something else, which is fine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's about it for the housekeeping. So we can start with the episode.
Shadow.
The shadow. What is the shadow? Well, as I mentioned in the previous episode, I said that it's a concept developed by the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. We can obviously explore his other ideas in more depth in other episodes, but the concept of the shadow, or to simply understand it, our dark side, it's quite big actually as a concept. I mean, it's very in depth, and we can probably dedicate several episodes to it, and we probably will at some point in the future. But the definition of it, so just to define it, if you've been wondering this past 3 minutes, to me, what it means to me, because there could be many definitions for it, and to me personally, it means the shadow is basically the underbelly of your personality, your day-to-day personality. It's kind of like something that's like hidden underneath. It's usually the things that, if you notice in other people, maybe things that everyone kind of thinks about, and maybe you think about it. And this is something also interesting, is that a lot of people don't know their secret thoughts or their perverse things and impulses. They kind of block them out. But some people are more aware of them. And if you tell that to those people, they're like, oh yeah, of course. Like, yeah, I have those thoughts. And they quickly understand what the shadow is. But that's kind of what it is. And also to explain a bit more about the unconscious, obviously in psychoanalytic theory, there's the idea that we have the conscious mind, and that's our ego. So basically what I'm doing right now, talking to you, that's my conscious mind being engaged. But also my unconscious part of my mind is also engaged. So, and that is something that I'm unaware of, right? I mean, thinking about thousands of things at the same time you would go insane, basically, right? It's impossible. I can't think of like my childhood right now as I'm talking on this podcast, right? So, but those things are there. They don't disappear, right? A good way to think about it also is things you forget. You don't really forget them. They don't disappear.
Yeah.
They just go from your consciousness into your unconsciousness, right? Or subconsciousness as the popular term. But Jung referred to it as unconscious because you are not conscious of it. And it's not like sub means like it's somehow underneath, but it's underneath, but it's also more powerful than something that's like just beneath, it's like it's very vast, because it can contain things, a lot more things than your conscious mind. I've been rambling a lot about it, but yeah, the shadow is to me things that we suppress, so we don't like to think about those things, right? Like things that happen day to day, things from the culture that comes to us. Do you want to add something? Any other interesting ways you can define it?
My definition is quite aligned with what you just mentioned. I think I mentioned this, briefly in the first episode about self-sabotage, in which I talked about the shadow briefly as being this container in which you store all the traumas, the bad events, all the unpleasant traits, or everything that it's a bit, repressed, suppressed, or the society is just telling you no. No, this is not good. Or a good guy should not be doing this, for example. That's just an example. Again, it's always perceived as your negative side, but it's not your negative. And if you keep thinking about your shadow as a negative, then it's hard to integrate it. And we're gonna talk about shadow work after this definition. But it's a dark side. It's a side that you don't want to deal with, or you might be aware of it, you keep ignoring, or it's unknown. Like you're just reacting over some hidden stuff that you're not aware of. And especially that more than 90% of our actions are unconscious, like stuff we just do on a daily basis. So this is the shadow. I think a good way of just giving an example of what is the shadow, or for people to understand it in a better way, I think we should explain what's a persona. And
you want to do that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, go.
I can do that, Aslan. Thank you for putting me in this position. No. So the persona is basically the multiple layers you build, like your mask. Let's think about it as a mask that you put in front of the public view. So this persona is the, like, let's say Aslan point 2, like the other version of Aslan that deals with other people, that goes to parties and, like try to fit in communities, or like build connections with people. It's not purely you, or it's not purely me. It's the facade that we put in front of people to be liked, or to be treated in a good way, or to fit in the community. And we're going to also talk about the concept of duality, but I think it's not a bad thing that you have multiple personas. I think that I have a persona in front of my parents that is way different from my persona in front of my friends. And this is just, if you're aware of it, that you just know that you need to adapt your behavior based on the people you're talking with, not in a deceiving way or that you're trying to manipulate these people, but it's just the way it is. Like every context has a way of, like dealing with stuff. The way you're going to talk in a TED talk, it's not the way you're going to talk in a podcast. It's not the way you're going to talk with a friend. But you just need to realize that you're not faking yourself. You're aware that you're building a certain persona because the circumstances require that kind of persona.
Exactly. And that's a very good thing you mentioned, actually, because with the shadow, with understanding this concept, and a lot of Jungian concepts as well, people always can like mistake them or use them like incorrectly, and they think that, this is what it is. And I'll give examples of this as well. But that's a very good point about like you being socially aware and switching like a little bit the way you talk, or the way you say things, or the things you reveal or choose not to reveal. It's not really, I would say it's not really the shadow. It's more like just you being socially aware and being polite or political in certain situations.
But the thing is, if you're not aware that you have these personas, then it becomes a shadow.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my point.
Yeah, so you exactly. So you have to, if you're doing it consciously, then you're aware of it. If you don't know, then it's, and I think at that point it becomes unconscious, right? And this is the key thing about the shadow, is that you are the traits that you have in your shadow, the shadow traits, and they could be like anything for anyone, like, I don't know, being outgoing, or being proud of yourself. It could be many different things, negative, positive. It really depends on what you suppressed or what the society or your family. It could be a family shadow. People have that. When you say in your family, like, yeah, we don't cuss here, or we don't use bad words, or don't use the word hate, like things like that. That has a very powerful effect on the child. So of course you're gonna, like, that's gonna be suppressed, right? It's like a functional thing as well. And I think that's a good point as well with what you said. Like, if you're unaware of it and you're doing it, it's also a functional thing, because when you're born as a child, I mean, you have all these crazy impulses, right? Like, just uncontrolled. Your personality is whole, right? But it's raw. It's not defined. It's not like functional in a society. So you have to, you when your parents tell you stuff, like, it's just adapting, like you have to, because your parent is too powerful. So you have to listen to them at some point and say, okay, like, I'm going to suppress this, or like, I'm going to suppress this impulse to be a functional member of the family, right? And then the society, the school, everything, right?
That's the thing. Like, whatever impulse you're controlling yourself from not to execute or act on it, it doesn't mean necessarily it's a bad thing, because that's also like, it depends on the social conditioning and the culture. So if you're just being funny, sometimes your parents can tell you, no, it's not a good time to be funny, or like, you don't have to act this way. Well, being funny is not a bad thing, but because you suppress it, it goes to this dark container again, which is your shadow. And that's a good thing you mentioned about being a kid. Like, you just have all these impulses, which makes sense that there are some stuff, I would say, as a kid, you have to learn also to filter and not do whatever you want, because then that's also a problem, right? But the thing is, if you're not understanding that these things are not good to do in a certain context, and you just start like oppressing yourself from doing stuff, or like oppressing these traits, you will start having these coping mechanisms that you're just trying to fit in certain contexts. Like, you're not actually being yourself. You're just faking and doing whatever it takes just to fit in, which afterwards is gonna come out as a frustration, or you're gonna have these emotional outbursts of like, okay, like, okay, well, let's say I like making jokes, right? And your parents are always serious, like, no, you don't have to do this, or you don't have to do that. Okay, well, my coping mechanism is gonna be like, okay, always having this face, right? But then at some point you will get outraged by this persona that you're just faking it the whole time, because it's not doing you any good. You're just trying to cope or adapt with your parents, but it's oppressing many. And this is just an example of like making jokes, but normally it's way sometimes it's extreme, and sometimes it's even worse.
And that obviously, doing that for a long time, you basically, like, what happens is you're forming like a personality basically within yourself, and like in your, well, it goes in kind of your subconscious, because this thing that you're suppressing, it's storing up, and that's kind of how the shadow formulates. And I know that, like, in a lot of the times, actually, it's like in families, it's like, well, as a children, usually it's like, and a society, it's like sexual things and aggression. Because like, well, at least I would say in the Western society, let's say, it's things that are, like, you know, when you're a kid, you know, you can't, like, I think the healthy way of looking at this is like, of course you can feel the thing, like you can be angry, right? That's fine. Like, I think like the bad thing happens is when you try to suppress the feeling as well. Like, or like when you're crying as a, like, let's say boys crying or something, right? Like, if you're like said, boys never cry, don't cry, then it's like, it gets into a bit of a territory where it's like, you're definitely going to be suppressed, definitely going to be stored, and later in life, you're going to have to deal with that. But then if, let's say you're angry, right? But let's say you're angry at your sister, right? You can be angry, but don't like hit her, you know, like don't be violent.
Yeah.
But it's fine to be angry and to learn to deal with your feelings, you know, just sit down and try to like, yeah, like as a kid, you're like, well, depends on the personality. Children have different personalities, but like just sitting down and like, well, your parent has to tell it that to you, sitting down and trying to like get a grip, you know, like, and that's the process of where you're like kind of integrating it in a healthy way, where at a point where you're a kid. Because if you don't, you suppress it, let's say, and this is something that also happens with adults. So you suppressed it, right? And let's say, what is it, like aggression, right? It's completely suppressed, no aggression. Then as you grow up as an adult, that part of you is still in your subconscious and it's raw, like it's not developed. So at work, when you have to be like aggressive or like assertive, like you don't know what that is like you're like not, you haven't learned to properly what do you say, like make use of it, basically. Can we stop for a second? Is it recording or no?
Yeah,
There's just one sound there.
No,
sure?
it's recording.
Okay, it's good.
Yeah,
because okay, that's
don't worry.
All right, because I was like, it can make me crazy. Anyway, yeah, what was I saying?
That's an example for raw podcast, you know, like we don't do editing, we just keep going, even though it just messed up, but it's fine.
Yeah, we need to do more of that, because like sometimes I think, like, you know, there are just 2-minute divergence.
Okay.
Some podcasts where like I listen to a lot of podcasts, and sometimes people do like, you know, like you listen to an episode and it's like kind of no interaction with the listener. It's like just it's like snapshot of a conversation.
Okay.
And it's very polished, very nice. But then I kind of like when you involve the people as well. Like
you address them directly.
Yeah. It's like we're kind of part of this. It's cool. You know, we're doing this together. It's chill. We're people, you know.
Thank you. That's a good reminder.
Right? Like we're people as well. We're not like these avatars of, you know, the scholars talking about deep things, deep shit. What was I saying about the feeling thing?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a good example of like assertiveness, because this is also like when you fake this behavior of just being agreeable the whole time, it becomes you, and you cannot survive in this world by just being agreeable. Like you're gonna find it really hard in the workspace, with friends, especially if you have like masculine friends, and in society in general. Like I wouldn't say it's a bad trait of being agreeable, but like thinking about success, or thinking about reaching something, or thinking about like negotiations, thinking about sales, like it's a must-needed skill to be assertive and learn on how to not be agreeable the whole time. And this is I don't know if you listen to Jordan Peterson, but he talks about
like being a monster, or like control the monster.
Controlling the monster is a good concept that I also wanted to talk about in the podcast. But I was referring to like his conversation with
Robert Greene.
No, his conversation. How is she called? Got you.
Okay, yeah.
So what you're saying is
okay, everyone probably knows.
I don't remember her name.
I forgot. Yeah,
but
BBC
when they were talking about like agreeableness. Well, we're going off track a bit. Let's go to controlling the monster.
Yeah.
He's influenced by Carl Jung. Like he highly likes Carl Jung's ideas. And what I like about this, well, Carl Jung also had this quote of the meaning of the quote is, if you want to reach your completion, you have to be aware that you're capable of both good and evil. And what he means by this is, and let's put an example here so everyone can understand. So you can have this kind friend who never reacts in a bad way, or he never puts himself in like, you know, like a compromising situation in which he needs to
do you want to switch? We have a bad friend.
Yeah.
Bad friend.
No.
A good friend or bad? What was that?
No. A good
A good friend.
well, a kind friend.
Kind friend,
let's
right.
say.
Kind friend.
But they don't
yeah.
put themselves into like dangerous situations,
Okay.
and they justify this by being morally good.
Right.
Like they don't want to get in fights, they don't want to get in
yeah,
these kind of bad situations. But controlling your monster, or what Jordan Peterson refers to as like, you need to be dangerous. And I didn't get in the beginning. Like, okay, what is like being a dangerous?
Yeah.
What he means is you should be confident enough that you're capable of doing bad things, yet controlling yourself to do good things. That's controlling your monster.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that, because you can justify it as being morally good, but your shadow would say that you're just weak.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to get yourself into this, you know,
Exactly.
this kind of bad situation.
Yeah.
But if you're capable of being in a fight or like doing bad things, yet you control yourself, you're still ethical, you're still morally in check, then that's controlling your monster, and that's integrating your shadow.
There are some, that's a very good point. There are so many examples of this concept of like cowardice. Like you can justify being a morally good person by actually being a coward.
Yeah,
like,
Nietzsche talks about this as well. He has like a specific term of this. I don't know, like.
Yeah,
I don't remember the term.
I'm pretty sure Nietzsche said something like that, though. Yeah. It's very interesting. And I think everyone at some point, I mean, I can definitely remember a time when, for me, I think maybe in the past, it's been more like problematic, those kind of things where I would justify to myself that I'm like, oh, I'm just, I don't want trouble. Like, I'm just keeping it together. But in reality, there's also this unconscious thing where you're like, actually, you're afraid of the conflict, right?
You can justify it as like like you might think about yourself as like you reach self-mastery, like no, I controlled myself. I know that if I put myself in this situation, I would react in a bad way. But if you think about it deeply, like the roots of why you behave that way, it's probably just cowardness.
And I think like the good thing here is to like obviously to mention is that when you can like, but the answer is also not to like, let's say someone insults your friend, right? Right. Or like they make really like bad jokes or something that's completely out of place and you notice it, right? It's a just thing. You notice it. It's a rightfully good thing. But then you have this dilemma like, okay, or even let's say your girlfriend. I think that's a better example, right? Someone is maybe insulting your girlfriend or like getting too comfortable or something, right? Now you have a choice, right? Like, and let's say this person is someone you know, right? Like someone you're close with, right? So now you have a choice whether or not to, like, what are you going to do in that situation, right? Like, do you engage them and like cause a scene, like push them or something? Like that's kind of a bit uncontrolled a little bit because obviously it also depends on what they're doing. If they're gonna like, if they're just making some silly jokes or something, you can get aggressive, start a fight. That's a bit of a uncontrolled, I think, in my opinion, it's a bit of an uncontrolled reaction to it. You're not actually, in this case, your shadow is like, you're aware of it, but it's not necessarily integrated. You're just kind of having this outburst of energy and that's a good example of also like, if it's suppressed and you haven't learned to integrate it as an adult, then you don't know how to change your voice, how to change your stance, your energy to showcase that this is not okay, right? You can, even by the way you speak, it could change. If you integrated the shadow, the way you speak in certain situations, you can change that.
Jordan Peterson does it really well.
Right,
Like the way he just changed his tone of voice and the way he changed his looks, like,
looking
like this.
It's like just,
he does it super well. I get what you're saying about this situation. But I think so what you said is like, you might think about controlling the situation, like you're more likely not to react in a bad way because other people are involved. Could be like your friend or your girlfriend.
Say it's a party or something. I mean, it's like
I think because of this emotional outburst, other people more likely to behave or do something in that situation because, again, they're building this persona in front of the other person. And even though they're weak or like they're cowards, if they're building like a tough guy persona, they need to react.
Yeah.
Because it's a bit selfish, but they're going to think about themselves, proving that they're assertive and they can react in this situation more than, you know, like in the back of your mind, like, oh, the other person is involved, like maybe she's gonna get hurt or something like this, you know? Like it's more like proving something in front of the other person than actually thinking about the overview of, okay, what if I do this, the other person is gonna get hurt or something.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's a bit tricky.
Yeah. But I mean, it's always, I just remembered like how I would always, I remember my dad having that thing where he could like, just the way he talks, like he could switch 1 second.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh shit, he's serious. Like, and you're like, you feel it. Like, well, maybe it's because it's your parent, of course, but like you can, and as a kid, you're
like the aura changes.
Yeah, man. Like you can feel it. And I think that's the shadow. That's a good example of like integrated dark side. Like it's like, it's controlled basically, but it's kind of, it's hard to do. But I mean, we're going to talk about the integrating your shadow as well. I mean, it's a very interesting thing. What else do we want to mention here?
I think what we should mention before the shadow work is the shadow discovery. Like how to discover your shadow, or how to be aware that you have a shadow, or what kind of also like what are your shadow aspects, because they're not the same. Like we're all unique and different. Yeah. So we have different shadow aspects.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention is like a pretty big concept is the projection, right? So, and the simple way to explain this is people that annoy you, basically. It's super easy. Everyone has someone. You can probably right now think of someone that annoys you, or someone that really gets under your skin that you know, right? Like, or maybe you don't know. Maybe it's someone's like a celebrity or something. And this is the concept of the projection, right? And what happens in this case, basically from a Jungian perspective, and this is something that I learned on this Jungian Life podcast. It's really good. You should give it a listen.
Dude, start promoting our podcast more. You're just promoting other podcasts.
Well, I'll do it at the end.
Okay.
Yeah. So what was I saying? That projection. Yeah. So obviously, this is how it works, basically. Okay. So I mentioned in the beginning about your personality being whole, right? When you're born, nothing is lost. You're whole. You know, your kids, you know, as a child, you get angry, then you're sad, then you're crying, then you're jumping around. It's uncontrolled emotional outbursts, right? So this is when your personality is more or less whole. Then society disciplines you. You start behaving in a very controlled way, right? But when that happens, there's a part of you still inside. It's like in your personality. It's like a part of you that remembers what it was like to be whole, right? So it doesn't forget this. So you go through life, right? And this thing inside of you, it's almost like it finds something to focus on. And then, well, there's a concept of the hook. It's also like a Jungian concept. Your shadow hooks onto things, basically, right? And it could be a person, but then if you can go deeper, and this is where people make a lot of mistakes, you know, when you say like, oh, that person annoys me because, let's say, this person is really like, they're really proud of their good looks, right? Like they're showing off, or like they're really, and that, let's say that annoys you, and you can say, okay, so it annoys me. That means it's in my shadow, right? Like I'm suppressing that. So what I should do is also show off. I should also to bring it to my consciousness. I should be okay with showing off and like being really proud of the way I look, right? And this is where people can oftentimes make mistakes, because it's very simple to do that. It's like a formula, right? Like, okay, this guy, he's very like hardworking, and he annoys me, so I'm gonna become hardworking as well.
Yeah,
it could work, but it may not work if like if you don't sit down and really think about what is it about him that annoys you in this particular case. Is it hardworking? Pretty abstract concept. Maybe it's the way he talks. Maybe it's the way he gets his things done. Maybe it's something that, like, let's say you can be really hardworking, but your life could be a mess. Or like, what is it about this thing? Is it the way he speaks? Is it the way he sits? It can really go deep.
Yeah, I think oftentimes it's an element that you're lacking yourself.
Yeah.
And I can bring a personal experience with like shadow work. So I also used to dislike a guy during my bachelor. So this guy was always in class, and I used to think about him like exactly what you said. Like, this guy is just trying to show off. He's trying to, well, not about his looks, but he used to talk a lot with like teachers and just expressing himself basically. And I used to think about this guy like, yeah, look at this guy again, just talking, you know.
Yeah.
Look at this guy again, like trying to, you know, impress the girls, or like trying to, you know, like showcase that he's a good speaker, you know. But the reality or the root of this feeling is what I lacked, which is just the confidence of sharing my opinions in front of other people. Because I always used to think that, okay, maybe what I'm going to say now, it's not going to be really appealing for everyone.
Right.
Like, what I'm going to say, no one's going to relate to, or, you know, this perfectionist, anxious attitude, you know, like of just, okay, I'm not going to do it just because I'm afraid of, you know, other people's judgment or something like this. So I realized this like way afterwards, because the thing is, like, I don't remember these many people from the class. It's like also the events you have in life. Like, you don't always remember everything in your like memories storage, but you remember the most remarkable events, especially like the ones that hurt, or the ones that are related to your shadow, which is an example like this. Like, I just disliked the guy because he was simply sharing his opinions, and I couldn't do it. He was not a show off. He was not a bad guy.
He was just being himself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's an example of when you lack something, or when you see an element in someone's behavior that you actually lack, you start having this kind of resentment, or you know, sometimes people can get a bit aggressive. I've seen this in my entourage of people, especially when it comes to like financial security. When like some people, they have this resentment toward people with more money, because they think that, okay, they're lucky, they have all the circumstances in which they can grow or do stuff. So they start building this resentment. They don't like the guy without any bad encounter, even with this other guy, you know?
Yeah.
It's just something that you're lacking. And that's a good thing for shadow discovery. I think for shadow discovery, you should keep noticing why you have these feelings. If you don't like someone, why you don't like this person. Is it actually justified? Like, are they bad people? Or you're just maybe lacking something, or you're trying to project this element on other people, or you're just trying to, I don't know, conceal what you're lacking by hating on other people. As a form of justification, you would say, well, they're bad. It's easy to label people. It's the easiest thing that you can do. Like, I don't like you because you have weird ideas. What's even weird, you know?
Yeah. And
you just justify, you know?
Yeah.
You just label, you just put labels. That's the easiest thing you can do.
Yeah. I think like, you always do that. And I think like, I really like that when you like, when someone doesn't like something, or like is like unusually hating something, you're always like, really, like, what is it about it that you really hate? It's a really good thing. I don't usually do that. I'm like, because it's usually jokes as well. Like, people always make like, in a joking manner, they just like, but then the hatred, you can see it's like, okay, they thought about this.
Yeah.
Like the hatred thing.
Well, I don't do it sometimes like to call people out. It's just like, okay, are you sure that this is like the reason behind this behavior? You know, like.
Yeah. And I think the right attitude.
I'm making you think, dude.
And I think the right attitude in this situation, like, instead of like being so like emotionally charged and like outraged about something that like gets under your skin, is just to be curious. As soon as you feel that, just like think about it and ask yourself like, okay, what is it about this that really like gets me like riled up? And I think oftentimes you're gonna find that if you think long enough about it, you're gonna find that, okay, this is something that I don't have, or I'm not doing.
Yeah.
Like, it's something that's missing in my being, in my personality, right? So, and in that case, that's oftentimes like, yeah, you were stumbled upon a shadow trait that, yeah, you can now start working on integrating. And I think the big part of it also is just noticing it is already like majority of the battle that you have to do. It's like just noticing it already, like you started it, like you started the process already. So at this point, I think I guess I'm gonna move on to integrating it now in a weird way. Or you want to mention something?
Yeah, I want to mention some other stuff.
Right.
I think, well, being aware, but also, again, we're just being gentle with you guys. Like, don't beat yourself up just because you have like bad behaviors or bad feelings towards people. Like, this is part of your shadow work. The best thing to do in your shadow discovery is just accept them as your shadow aspects and know for sure that you were not in control of them. Like, you were not aware, okay, you know, like, this is my shadow, but I'm gonna justify it this way. Just accept it the way it is. Don't beat yourself up. Also, in terms of shadow discovery, and again, I cannot have a podcast without mentioning Mr. Robert Greene. In his book, The Laws of Human Nature, he gave some examples of, well, we can relate it to shadow discovery, but this is like how you can notice the shadow in people's behaviors or in yourself, basically. And he gave a few examples that I can mention. There is the contradictory behavior. And an example of this one is like someone who's always preaching morality and ethics.
Right.
But when he's put in a compromising situation, you can see the way he's justifying his decisions that they're not super aligned.
Yeah, I can see the duality. Dual split, like in personality.
Yeah. But he would not accept seeing someone acting the same way.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
That's a contradictory behavior that shows your shadow as well. There is emotional outburst, and that's when you lack self-control. Like, that's when, you know, like, fuck this persona. Like, and you just outrage. You just let it out, whatever this shadow is. Like, you can get in a fight. You can start like crying. You can start screaming. Like, it's an emotional outburst. You don't control it anymore. It you just let it out, basically.
Yeah, it's that a good example of it is like people, you know, when they're like super shy or like super introverted, and then when you get them drunk and like they're in a party, like they have this moment where they just go insane, like they go crazy, like they're like, oh wow, like you're like, it looks like the person suppresses a lot, and then there could come a moment where they let out so much, and they're like, you're like, oh wow, there's like night and day difference. And I think this is also a good example of like the outburst thing. It's like,
I think substances in general, they help you like with the emotional outbursts. They don't help you with good things most of the time. They help you doing bad stuff. There is vehement denial, and I think that's also something that Nietzsche mentioned before. And well, we can give an example about this as someone who does not accept homosexual people, but they have like some homosexual desires themselves. Classic. That they're classic.
Very classic example.
It's bad that it's classic, but it's this vehement denial is, I can see it in many people. Well, not only this example, but this is just an example of this kind of behavior, and it's mostly related to the shadow, and I think mostly the roots of it is society, is your parents, and what they tell you that it's not good.
Yeah, in this case, it's very much the societal and family shadow,
social codes and social conditioning.
Exactly. But and oftentimes when people do that, it's like, to be honest, like it's this thing, just to explain the dynamics of this, it's something that they have in themselves, it's usually something
that they
deeper,
hate.
that they hate.
Yeah.
So if, let's say that, like, you know, like you're like in a super conservative family and your kid comes out as gay, it oftentimes, like, the most outrageous reaction you could have is like, you know, you're no longer part of this family. And it happens, right? I mean, and at that thing is like they really hate that in themselves, and then by attacking the kid, they're just like letting all that anger directing it at that person, right? So that's a dynamic of, I think also that could be like a really extreme outburst as well.
And they can get really aggressive. Like I just remembered now a scene from Elite. I don't know if you watched Elite.
No.
But in the beginning, there's this gay guy called Omar. I think he was like dealing, and he found his friends beating a guy for being homosexual. And he's homosexual himself, but because of religion and because of society, he was not like, you know, like letting it out.
Right.
And he started beating this guy up as well. Like he engaged also in this aggressive behavior.
Yeah.
Which is, that's vehement denial.
Yeah.
Like this is literally vehement denial.
Yeah.
Like you just hate this so much in yourself that you can be that aggressive and beat other people up just because they have the same attributes, but they're just like brave enough to just like, you know, say that, okay, this is who I am.
Yeah, and that's the scapegoat thing where you find the scapegoat and then you channel your hatred towards them, and that happens a lot.
And it doesn't like, help.
No.
It doesn't make you feel any better.
No.
Just like,
it's like
makes it worse.
Yeah, with bullies as well, it's a common thing. Like
we watched that Key and Peele scene yesterday.
We were watching
it was so good.
It was a really good one where it's like, you know, when bullies, there was always one guy who's like the main guy with the shadow issues, you know, like the person,
that's the leader. That's
he's like the. But you know, when I was a kid, like obviously there were bullies in my school, and I never thought about it this way, but yeah, they're like obviously the reason why they hate, you know, the person who's being bullied, usually like a smart kid, somewhat of an outsider,
like a nerd, a shy kid.
Exactly, right. It's you think about everything that they do not have, like like the ability to just sit down and get something, like to read something, get something done, like kind of emotionally not able to control themselves. It's like things that obviously they really deeply hate in themselves, that they do not have that. And obviously they find someone to project it on.
This projection thing, it's super funny. Like it's crazy and funny. Like like someone who's not doing good in school, and just by seeing someone like reading a book, like, do you think you're smart? Like, do you think you're smarter than us? Like, dude, give me a break.
Oh yeah, it's
well, one of the other behaviors is accidental behavior, and that's when you talk about, like, for example, quitting an addiction, but you find a way to justify that you're not gonna quit this addiction, or like maybe you're in a toxic relationship that you know that it's not good to be in, but you're still justifying this as like, the only reason is that I don't want to hurt the other person. But you know, like deeply, that you also want to be involved in this relationship for some reason. This is also some kind of like shadow aspect dominating you to just stay in this relationship, kind of. So I think all the previous behaviors that we mentioned, it's a good step to notice your shadow aspects. And again, I think the best way to just understand that you have shadow aspects and you need to work on them is to just assess yourself, assess your decisions, especially the bad ones, or start assessing, okay, why this friendship didn't work, why this relationship didn't work, why am I always like not taking credits for my work in the workspace. Like, think about all these things, especially the bad ones, and start like thinking about the roots of them. Okay, again, I think I want to mention this. One of the good things about shadow discovery as well, if you cannot do it by yourself, I think it's good to ask people, like especially your parents, or like your good friends, you know, like, what kind of behavior do you see that I'm projecting on other people, or like, do you see me reacting in an aggressive way in certain like situations that you noticed? And it's
Yep.
good to have feedbacks from other people, because the easiest, and that's also like, that's something really interesting. Like, you might find it super difficult for you to just assess yourself and say, this is my shadow, but you can easily just like, point it out on other people. Like, I know Aslan does this, or like Aslan reacts in a bad way in this situation. But it's super hard to just like not be aware, but to just like say that you have the same attributes yourself, So if you cannot just discover your shadow, maybe it's good to ask for other people's feedbacks, especially like people close to you.
Yeah. And also, like, one thing about that is, like, let's say a more extroverted approach to integrating your shadow, let's say, where you need other people for it, right? So in this case, you could, let's say, even being like, when we watch movies, it's like a good way to integrate your shadow.
Do you guys like Fight Club, by the way? Because we want to talk about Fight Club.
We will. Yeah.
Fight Club is a good example of the shadow.
For sure. Yeah, when you watch some like Fight Club, for example, you see this guy. I mean, he's like, first he has this meaningless life, and then he finds this another guy, Tyler, I believe his name is, and then starts this Fight Club with him, just letting out all his anger, all his emotions. There's like a drama here. There's like a story, right? There's so many things involved, and that's another really good way to integrate your shadow, is to like consume literature, read, watch films, right? That's perfect way to do, because you're involved, you're understanding different dynamics that are happening in there. And one thing is also, like, in real life, what you can do is, if you don't like someone, or let's say like you don't hate them, but you're kind of like, like you don't want to like hang out with them, or something about them, it's like, I don't want to be in love with that person. You
don't feel the vibe.
Yeah. A good way is to like actually try to maybe engage with them, because you can maybe understand, because in movies you can like, let's say there's a character who's a negative character, right? And you're like, oh, I hate them, but then you kind of start understanding why they're like that, or like what is it about them that and then you're like, okay, I can empathize with this character, right?
A good example is the Joker.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when the movie just came out and everyone watched the movie, everyone had empathy towards like the Joker. They were like sharing his picture dancing and stuff. And this is mostly because, well, now you understand that this person is a product of many other events that led him this way. And these events, like, they were affecting him in a negative way. So normally you see the final product, you judge the final product, but you don't know what's the backstory of the whole thing.
Yeah. And that's what shadow integration as a dynamic is, really. I mean, you start to understand this deeper motives that people may have, their life story and all these things, and you start realizing, oh, okay, like this is possible, and I can kind of relate to it, and I would probably do that myself if I was in that person's situations. Like, I don't, and that's where that you're like really close to, like, actually you've integrated your shadow at this point, because you're like, I can really understand this evil character, right? I understand that this, like, I could have done that. Like, there's something in me that I like that could do that, and that this example with Jordan Peterson, he always gives examples with the Auschwitz guards, and this is like super extreme example, but it's a really powerful one, because people who would look at the Nazis and then the Nazi guards, who were kind of ordinary men, really. I mean, they weren't like, like trained for years to be evil or anything. They became that. But the realization that I could have, like, if I was there at that time,
he said that clearly. I think with Joe Rogan, that conversation, I think he mentioned something about this.
I could have done that if I was there. Like, well, like, yeah, there's a
that's the collective. That's the collective. Unconscious.
Exactly.
And you just, I think there is, I don't remember his name, like Robert something. Okay. I think he was he know Carl Jung, and he also like asked him for advice to integrate his shadow, and I think he told him, like, one of the first steps is like exclude yourself from the collective unconscious. Like, just try to work on your inner shadow first, and then try to face the other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's one of the first things you want to do, because your environment always have an influence on you,
Yeah.
in a bad way or a bad way. Either ways, it doesn't matter. If you have like some shadow work to do, you should do that by yourself, and then try to face the collective unconscious.
Yeah. And then the easiest way, obviously, coming back to my original point, which I diverged into movies a little bit, but is, you know, in your personal life, trying to be like befriending and getting closer with the person that you don't like is actually a good way. If you want to do that, it's a good way to really understand them deeply, because if you're close to them, you can see them more often, see what they say, what they think, their thoughts, right? Like it's kind of like a drama in your life. You're living out.
That's exactly how you deal also with your shadow, because you don't like your shadow.
Yeah.
But you need to understand your shadow.
Exactly.
Like, you just need to get along.
Yeah.
It's exactly like someone you need to see every day in the workspace that you don't like.
Yeah.
But at some point you just need to get along, because
Yeah.
it's affecting you every day.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Asking like clearly also like asking yourself like what is it about this one thing? What is one thing about this situation or this person that really gets under my skin, right? Like, another thing is obviously journaling, and I think that's something that if you journal already, that's really good. You probably do some shadow work without realizing it if you're journaling. I mean, people write all kinds of things when they're journaling, but you can...
I think for sure Marcus Aurelius was doing shadow work in meditation.
That's a good point.
Because like that's literally journaling.
Yeah.
Like, he was reflecting, and he was reminding himself, like, remember, today you will meet unpleasant people.
Yeah.
And this is how you have to react. This is this, this is that,
Yeah.
you know? Like, he was reminding himself, he was journaling. But that's exactly shadow work. And I think this is the only example that I think of is Marcus Aurelius, like someone who clearly integrated his shadow as a Roman emperor, doing what's morally good from his perspective. And someone with such a power, with these quality thoughts. I just think that it's, you know, like, it's out of this world. Like, this is an example of someone who integrated his shadow successfully.
Yeah, it's with Marcus Aurelius. It's not only like crazy self-awareness, as like, but also very poetic. Like the way he writes, like, man, it's like a born poet.
Yeah,
like, it's just some of the
it's
things
insane.
he says.
We should have a separate like episode about Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, another like, well, obviously there's one more way to do this if you're
the chair thing.
Maybe, yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
It's more like if you're more introverted, let's say, you could kind of like when it comes to your shadow, you can imagine it as a person, right? Like kind of not like as a literal person. Have like, you know, there's a good example of this with Leo Tolstoy, the writer. He as he was writing, I forgot which one of his books, but it's an interesting story where as he was starting to write it in the beginning, he created these characters, right? Like, this is what imagination is, and you're exploring your own subconscious when you're doing it, right? These characters come from somewhere, right? And anyone can do this if you just sit down and dedicate time to it. He was writing characters, and there was one character, the main character, that you know, the backstory of this character or something really kind of like got under his skin, and he was actually like resenting, or like
so he was bothered by a character he created himself. Damn.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then as he kept writing and exploring this character, he like realizes he empathizes more with this character. You know, it's crazy.
That's super interesting.
Right?
Damn.
Yeah. I think it was Anna Karenina, the book, I think. It's like super popular. I mean, for a good reason. But yeah, that's a very, and anyone can do this. You can sit down and write, you know, your make up characters, you know, and
or just make it a dialogue. Like, write down your own conversation with your shadow. Like,
exactly.
Okay, why are you pushing me to react this way in these situations? And again, like, don't judge, don't beat yourself up. Just try to have a conversation that you would have with someone that you don't like, or someone you don't understand. Let's say it that way.
And one more last thing that I have is the dreams, because a lot of people, they have we'll have dreams, and um you will see your shadow in your dream at some point, you know.
I don't think at some point, since I started like learning about Carl Jung,
Okay.
I believe that every shadow is a communication from the unconscious, or your shadow just telling you stuff.
You mean every dream?
Yeah, every dream
yeah.
I have, like, it's a kind of message from your unconscious or your shadow. It's super interesting because I never thought about it that way, but I still remember the most remarkable dreams, and especially that always related about like someone's death, like especially someone close, or like, you know, a weird situation that, you know.
Yeah. Moral dilemmas, you know.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't want to talk about my personal dreams.
Yeah, of course.
But I
yeah.
think everyone could relate to these
Yeah.
dreams, like especially when it comes to death or like these bad situations. If you think about it deeply, there should be your unconscious telling you something. And that's something like Carl Jung, Freud, all of them, they talked about like reflection after these dreams. There was also an author, I'm not sure I remember his name, but he did something really interesting, that he was in a bad like health situation, but then he started having these dreams. And I think he had like a really bad dream that it was super engaging, that he was like, his wife noticed his body reactions, that he's suffering during the dream. She waked him up, and then he told her like, why did you wake me up? Like I was having this interesting dream. And then he started like reading more than 10,000 words a day, like as like he's remembering the whole dream, and he started like writing about the dream he was having. And then I think it doesn't make sense to just not mention this guy's name, because he released it as books, and he was like really successful.
Okay.
But that's really interesting as well, like just converting your dreams to something creative, and that's basically shadow work. Robert Greene talks about it clearly, that he has this negative side, that he's normally like angry, like that's one of the aspects of his shadow aspects, but he integrates this kind of shadow by writing books. Like he channels this kind of anger on creative work, and that's something you can do during your shadow work as well. Like you find something creative or something related to what you want to do, and start integrating your shadow in it.
Yeah, that's, I mean, creativity, that's a really good point, by the way. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, there's also, I mean, there are so many things you can do. I mean, sports. I mean, actually, you know, it's I think Freud said this about sports, is that people invented sports to kind of channel these anger and animalistic urges in
I
a
think he
very
was talking about
controlled way.
sexual desires again.
Sexual, yeah,
Yeah,
probably
mostly.
actually sexual.
That's Freud. Yeah.
Yeah, channel their sexuality in a very like controlled way, and it's like such a like outburst of energy, like a celebratory thing, you know, like football game or any competitive thing. And or like if you, I don't know, if you go to the gym or exercising, that's also a great way to like find a way to channel your, let's say, you know, the aggression and this raw feelings that we all have, you know. And yeah, do we want to add anything else about the integration of the shadow?
Yeah, I think also the example of like, that's something you can think of, like you can imagine the whole scene, you can visualize it, or you can do it yourself. Like just bring a chair and, you know, like sit here, talk to your shadow, then move to the other chair and let the shadow speak, because your shadow is integrated in you. So you want to hear like both sides. That's something you can either like visualize it, try to think about the whole conversation in your mind, or just like do it by yourself. Like just bring a chair and do it. Don't think that you're crazy doing this. This is super helpful. But
for sure,
obviously, like you get to choose what works more for you. Is it like this way, or journaling, or just thinking deeply about your shadow and why your shadow is reacting that way?
And also practicing as well a little bit, where like doing things, because like let's say you cannot be, let's say, assertiveness issue, right? The same thing, like slowly as you're doing the shadow work, slowly try to, when you face these situations in your life, try to actually react in a way that and someone with an integrated shadow would react, like try to be more assertive in certain situations where you're not assertive, right? Like kind of building these things up a little bit, where like let's say someone's showing off, like, or like someone at work who's like really proud of their work, and like it kind of annoys you. Try to think about, okay, maybe like next time when I accomplish something, I can share it with people in my work as well,
Yeah,
like
that's a good point,
right? Like start actually kind of doing the things as well. It's like building a habit, like
yeah, obviously, like practice would help you with any kind of issue you have. Like if you have bad communication skills, let's say, you need to start practicing at like a low degree, but you need to start doing that. And again, with the shadow is exactly the same thing, especially like if you're like if you feel that you're weak, you're a pushover, you don't put boundaries, and like everyone can bully you, like you should start reacting, because I think that's gonna be like the most well, not the most, no, doesn't make sense objectively. We cannot say that this is like the worst situation you can be in, but it's definitely one of the worst situations you can be in. It's just like being bullied or pushover, or like not putting boundaries in friendships or relationships, and being a pushover, because you're gonna suffer from your shadow. You're gonna go home every day thinking, like, having this resentment towards people, thinking about like vengeful thoughts, and also having this conversation with yourself, like, I should have said that, like, I'm doing this, or like I'm being kind to all of them, but I'm still receiving this kind of behavior, like this is a conversation you're gonna have with yourself like every day, and that's a fucking issue, dude. Like that's so bad.
I felt
that
that
is so
because
bad.
I felt that because I have that kind of
I think
tendency.
we all went through it, like especially this conversation with yourself. Well, not to extreme degree, but sometimes you have these situations in which like you just don't react, but then you go home and you're like, I should have said that. Like, what's wrong with me, And you start like just feeling bad about the whole thing. You start beating yourself up, like, why, like it's frustrating. But again, like if it's happening from time to time and you get to notice it and you work on it, that's that's fine. But if you have the like if it's a pattern, if it's every day happening in school or like high school, dude, that's gonna break you. Like you should do some shadow work. It's gonna be included in your morning routine. Like go to the gym, do shadow work, and then start your day.
It's very like it's something that I think is also personal for a lot of people, where like these things and you justify it to yourself in a lot of ways. Like that also happens where you're like like I'm not gonna, like, saying no. I think kind of the way to summarize it, like ability to say no. Like sometimes you're kind of like, I mean, obviously if you're too agreeable, let's say, you're too eager to please people. That is also something that may come from your childhood, where you're too eager to please, so you can't say no to people, and then you get resentful because you agree to things you don't that aren't in your best interest, basically. And like the ability to be decisive and like be able to be discerning, like be able to say, okay, no, I don't want that, I want this, right? Like that's something that also closely related to this issue. And I think everyone faces that. I mean, me definitely, for sure. Like I always have to just like sit down and really define. I mean, it comes to defining your values as well, because it's partly related to that, like who you are and what is it good for you, what is not good for you, and finding that balance between like going with the flow and seeing what happens, or like really like also knowing what you want, because if you go to one extreme, then you're like rejecting everything people are offering towards you, and then you're just like, no, I want this. But then life is such a weird thing, it's like sometimes saying yes and seeing what happens could also lead to interesting outcomes that you might find interesting. But I think the main thing is your intention. You know, are you making this choice because you want to do it, or because and this is when you get to sit down and think.
Yeah.
And when you think, you're like, okay, I did this because I was uncomfortable with saying no. I wanted to please this person, right? Like I didn't want to cause conflict.
Yeah, I think it's also worth mentioning that self-mastery is, I don't know if I should say super difficult or impossible. But like we're all a work in progress, and I think it's fine to have these thoughts from time to time. The alarming thing is the pattern that we just talked about. Like if you're going through this every day, then it's going to be a problem, because you might have these emotional outbursts, or like you're not going to be able to control yourself anymore, that you're just going to do something bad either to yourself or other people. So you don't want to channel this energy that way. But if you're having these thoughts like from time to time, because you're not going to be able to master yourself in literally every situation, because you're still a student of life. You're still going through many events, and you didn't go through all the events that you might be in. So you're still learning. Yeah. So yeah, self-mastery is difficult to reach.
It's important to mention, as always, you know, and I think I mentioned this in the first one as well, being compassionate towards yourself. It's very important.
Be kind to yourself.
It's easy to certain personalities of people, I think it could get to a point where you're like start like really beating yourself up because of something, and it can really affect your just enjoyment of life, basically. So really just being compassionate towards yourself and realizing that, you know, this is life. It's a journey of life, and you're on a path to wholeness, to individuation, as Carl Jung would say, right? Like having a whole personality. And it's a process. I mean, it takes a lifetime, literally. So,
I want to talk about like an aspect that maybe we didn't mention, but like that it's related to shadow work. And maybe I can give an example of American Psycho.
Okay.
Yeah. So in American Psycho, what's his name? Do you know his name? The
Patrick
protagonist?
Bateman, the character?
Yeah, Patrick.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
Yeah, so the protagonist in American Psycho, from the beginning of the movie, you can see that he's well integrated in his community. Like he's super accepted by his friends. He's making these jokes. He have like this status. He has a lot of money. But then the first scene that you're a bit like makes you like, okay, why is this guy doing this? In which he finds this guy in the streets, and he looks around him, and then he starts like just stabbing this guy, and you're like, okay, what the fuck just happened? Like, he didn't have to do this. Yeah. But then you start realizing that either like this is his dark side, shadow, however you want to define it. But that's a process of his like not integrating his shadow, because afterwards it's gonna start dominating him. Like he's gonna even start going to the extreme, and at some point he want to be noticed as someone who does these things. So in the beginning he was like trying to hide, so he was not like he was still trying to resist his shadow. At the end of the movie he starts like showcasing himself as someone who does this, and you can see also the aspect of how society perceives you when you start reacting in a certain way. Because like when he calls his advocate and telling him like, okay, I killed these people, I've done all of this, like no one wanted to believe him. And when he went also to this house in which he used to kill people, he found it like renovated and changed. And that's also a symbol of how society like tries to repress also and change whatever work in progress you want to do. Like you're gonna be challenged by society, or the social conditioning is gonna affect your behavior as well. So also that's something you should also put in mind while doing shadow work, is you're gonna find some resistance not only from your side but also from society.
Yeah, that's a very that's a very interesting.
That's deep shit, right? I know. Thank you.
That's a super interesting interpretation of the American
Well,
Psycho.
I didn't come up with myself. I watched like videos explaining like American Psycho, and I just remembered this shadow aspect from American Psycho.
Very underrated.
I know. Thanks.
It's a good a good interpretation because, obviously, like, yeah, it's very, because normally, like I guess like a normal interpretation of it would be that, like, well, there are different angles. That's what's so great about the book and obviously the film, is that the variety of angles you can look that you can look more literally, where, okay, and I think in that film, the society, I mean, that's a very popular theme, right? In the Joker,
Yeah.
the society, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
suppresses,
yeah.
right? Like, and in that case, he's part of this yuppie culture where it's like all about the prestige and money and materialistic things, and no one knows who anyone is. It's like very extreme, like example where no one literally knows, like the guy confuses each other, like they don't know who he is, like the what's his name, Alan, I think, whom he kills, like he doesn't even know that it's a different guy, not him. So it's like a very extreme situation, but that's a good example of how, yeah, like the society in general has a tendency, especially Western society, to like normalize everything. Everything's very rationalistic, very objective. There's no place for really like individuation and finding who you are as a person. It's very difficult because you want to fit in.
Because you have social norms,
Yeah,
and you just need to fit in based on society's criteria.
exactly.
So if you're a bit different, then you're different. You're not part of the society. Like you should find your own tribe.
Yeah.
Like go look for it somewhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere, man. One example I want to give is from actually like in offices and work, where there's always like, well, not always, but sometimes there's, or even in classroom, there's one guy who says things that everyone thinks about in class, but no one dares to say. And in workplaces, there's that guy who just dares to say things, and he gets away with it. Like, obviously, like, it depends on the personality. I mean, it's this natural people who are naturally more aware of the shadow, of the underbelly of normal daily interactions. They're so tuned with it that they're like, and they say it. And it's always amazing to me because it's like, wow, like this guy's like revealing the things and everyone thinks about it. Like everyone realizes it's in the unconscious and no one really like processes it. It's unconscious because you want to maintain the norm.
Yeah.
You want to maintain this illusion, this like tidy, okay, we're cool, we're good, and then there's this guy who says something, boom, like something that everyone thinks about, and you're like, and then everyone's like, oh man, come on, like
I have two examples of this, like personal stories.
Yeah.
I think I was once in a workspace, and I don't remember the context specifically, but I think a supervisor was just talking about some stuff, and the guy like said something that like no one dared to say, and then everyone thanked him for doing that. Everyone was just telling him like, yeah, thank you for saying this, but that's after the meeting that we had. And the other example is me being that guy. So I think in class the teacher, I think the professor went off time with like explaining stuff. And then during break time, and I think the main motivation was me drinking coffee because I needed a break to drink coffee. My sleep was super bad. So I think the professor said something like, yeah, we're going to skip the break, and everyone was just looking at each other, but everyone was quiet, like they didn't say anything. And I was like, I'm sorry, I think I need a break, I need to have coffee.
Okay.
And then she was like, okay, you guys take 7 minutes or something like this. And everyone was just like reaching out to me like, dude, thank you, we needed coffee as well.
Yeah, it's like challenging authority.
Yeah, because if you think about it, like especially in that context of a student, dude, like even the whole thing, like it's status, like the professor is standing up talking, that's already like a higher position. You're just sitting, like you need to obey whatever is happening, and you just consuming. You don't have you normally don't share your opinion because the professor is delivering the content or whatever. So even when you think about the whole formatting thing, you're thinking like, okay, should I say this because we're not on the same level at this point, But yeah, I think sometimes it's frustrating when you're in some context in which you know that the people you're dealing with are not gonna accept what you're gonna say.
Yeah.
And that's related to Never Outshine the Master. Law number 1, 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene. I'm doing a lot of promotion for Robert Greene, but it's worth it. I think his content is super good, and you guys check his books if you can. Yeah, and Carl Jung as well.
Yeah, it's this whole thing is really interesting with the challenging authority as well. It's like this. Well, I was just thinking, if you put it in like Freudian terms, it would probably be like superego as the teacher.
Yeah.
And you are the ego, and then, or like maybe the students all collectively are like the ego. If you imagine the classroom as your mind, your psyche, superego is the teacher, the classroom and the students are the ego, and they're like, yes, listening to the superego, because they're like, okay, make the fake persona, it's like, and then you have the shadow, right? It's like, okay, like, let's just, the shadow sees the bullshit, it's like, okay, like in the case of the Freud, it would be the id, which is like, I want coffee, like it's like an impulse, it's like, and you don't care, like, boom. And then the id often takes over as well. I mean, it's a very powerful thing. So that was a cool example of that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Is there something you want to add?
Not really. I think that's about it for me. I mean, I think we covered a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I think we did a good job with this one. We did the like, let's say, the aspect of like integrating your shadow and discovering it. We did it justice, I think, for the first.
Yeah, we also tried to be funny. I know that we're not that funny.
Yeah.
Adriano, we need you here. But we just tried to be a bit more engaging.
Yeah.
And I think I was thinking about the shadow thing in terms of celebrities, because you get to see their shadows most of the time. Like the thing that happened with Will Smith. I think that was literally his shadow, because he was thinking like, okay, no, he was joking in the beginning, and then he saw like his wife, and for her, like, the norm is him protecting her or something like this, and then he completely changed his behavior, and then he did whatever he did back then. But in celebrities, it's super easy to notice, because obviously they're celebrities, so there is a documentation behind them, like everywhere.
Yeah.
And you can see it in them, and that's maybe also like related to the halo effect, in which you see them like, okay, these are good people because you see them in movies or something, and you don't expect them to do any bad behavior, and you're super disappointed. Like, even there's this like cancel culture whenever they do something bad, like, okay, now you're canceled, like, we don't like you anymore. But
yeah, it's like that's a with Will, that was a good example with Will Smith, actually. I didn't think about that as the shadow thing, but now
I'm thinking about everything as a shadow, dude.
That's
like,
true. It's
we watched the movie yesterday, and we said that it was the shadow. Like, whatever happens now, it's the shadow. It's
for sure. Yeah, it's hard sometimes. Yeah, when you're thinking about something, you see it everywhere, basically.
But that's super interesting, because that's something we talked about also yesterday when we were like talking about the podcast, is that people do not focus, especially like in the field of self-help or like self-development, they don't focus on the shadow that much. Like, they talk about like spiritual thing, like, okay, build habits, go to the gym, make money. But I'm thinking like, okay, if you make money and you're jacked, and you meditate every day, but your shadow is not integrated, like, that's even more problems, because you have more power. Yeah. And the thing is, if you have more power, then you're more likely to react in really bad ways. Like, okay, if you're still like a student and you're trying to get over like bullies or whatever, like, you're trying to integrate your shadow, you're not that powerful. If you're like an authority figure, or like if you're really successful, that you have a huge network, you have money, and when you have money, you have power, and then if your shadow is not integrated, then that's a really bad thing. Yeah, that's a good one. I think we can think of so many celebrities and people in power who've done
stupid things because of that. But that's very true. I mean, it's like it's not a very sexy thing, I think, like to tell to people. As I mean, if self-help industry is like a business, if you think about it as a business, it's not the sexiest thing to tell people, hey, go and think about all the things that are bad about you, or the things that you don't like about yourself. It's like, oh, come on, like I have to now like face.
Like you think that it's not gonna sell, or you think that it's...
I think it's kind of like it's a little bit, you challenging people a little bit, because it's like, I think it's just like a very it's like a very challenging thing, because I think like for me personally, as I'm reading, like I was preparing for the podcast as well, I was thinking about, oh man, like because I'm reading also about people's stories and things from films. I'm like, oh man, there are so many things out here that people fall in these traps, like they have not having integrated their shadow, and I'm thinking, fuck, like I gotta sit down and like think about these things. Like you have to, like, it's hard. Sometimes it's nice and you're lucky, like, and that's what I like about the conversations here, is that like sometimes in a conversation you say something and I'm like, oh, okay, that made me think, it clicked. So okay, oh, that's good, that's definitely my shadow. But sometimes you don't have access to that, so you have to just sit down and like make your brain like think.
That's practicing that. That's challenging your shadow again, like having these conversations that would make you think like, oh shit, yeah, that's me. Or like learning, because we've done research about the shadow, but we're also discovering stuff about ourselves. Like it's not only like, that's the easiest thing to do, just like channel it to other people, like, oh yeah, this, whatever, this attribute, yeah, I know it from this guy. But you're also discovering stuff about yourself, like, oh fuck, yeah, I used to do that, or like, I'm doing this, I should work on it.
One thing I discovered about myself actually is something that...
Shoot. I'm interested now.
Yeah,
more interested.
It's quite curious. I mean, it's quite funny. But you know how we've been, we meet up for things a lot of times, and I'm always like someone who's late, or like I'm always, and that's been like a bit of a thing between me and you, because you're always on time or even early, and I'm always kind of late. And to me, like when we're meeting up, to me it's always like it's a bad cycle in a way, but like at least I've identified it gets a little bit under my skin how you're like always on time, like and I've noticed that about myself. And I well, at first, like maybe like a month ago or something, at first, those things happened. It was like, okay, whatever. And sometimes, it would get under my skin a little bit. I'm like, oh, why is he always on time? Or like, why is he like so structured? Even when it's like just like kind of a casual hangout or something, it's like, like he's gonna definitely point out that I'm late, or like, and it's like gets under my skin a little bit and makes me uncomfortable. So it's like, I mean, it's not like something that tortures me or anything, but it was just like something that I've noticed that, okay. And then I thought about it with myself. It's like, okay, like yeah, that's true. I do not value that as much, like being on time. It's not like I'm like, and this is something about being honest with yourself. It's like you can say, oh, I'm trying really hard, to be on time, but
I'm a Gemini, I can't help it.
Yeah, I'm trying really hard, but I was in this line, in the tube. I'm using the British thing. It's the train. I'm in the train, the metro. There was a queue. I had to wait for. Oh, it's always that thing. I'm someone who's late a lot, so there's always that thing where you're standing there and you're like, okay, I'm gonna be late probably 5 minutes, and I'm like, okay, it's just a train. It's like not arriving on time today or something, and. If you're just like, and I've been honest with myself about that, and I'm like, yeah, like I just subconsciously, I do not value that as much, like being on time. And in that case, for me, I mean, first of all, realizing it has been really helpful. And now it's just all about like building that habit of like actually being on time and trying to figure out, a way to, I think like realizing it, actually like really going deep into it really helps you not to be angry about it at the very least, because you're like, okay, I know this about myself, right? Okay, what are we going to do about this, right? Because in this case, it's like a functional way to solve it is just like, put an alarm or something, when you have to leave. Because a lot of times for me, I'm like, it's not like I want to be late, but sometimes something grips me, or I like something wins over being on time, let's say.
Excuses.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But yeah, it's just about like actually in this case like valuing that as a value, because you pay attention to things and you do things that you really value, right? So self-control, valuing things, and then being considerate of other people as well.
Yeah, so. I think that's a good example, but I just want to make sure, is it like the way I'm telling you that you're late, or is it because you're late?
No, it's because because you notice it.
Okay.
Because you notice it, and you rightfully point it out. I mean, it's like it's a fact. Yeah. I'm late. But a lot of times people wouldn't point that out. Yeah. Like they wouldn't make a big deal out of it or make any deal out of it.
Do I make a big deal out of it?
Not really, but I
do mention it.
You mention
it. I do mention it.
Like, you mention it, like, effort, like, well, what's the word?
Like obviously you're late
every time. Like, it's very consistent.
Obviously, Aslan, you're late again.
Yeah. So, and it's like, but it's very interesting because, like, that's something that led me to the situation where, like, oh, yeah, like, and to think deeper about it, I think, like, I'm just not a very, like, super regimentedly structured person. Like, I can get things done, but like I'm
on your own pace. You don't have to put like you don't have to time block yourself to do stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's something I do. Like, I'm completely the opposite. Like, I have to time block even like my breakfast, my breathing, my like every section in my calendar. And that's why I always invite you to my calendar events, because if I'm doing the podcast with you, then I should just invite you to the events I'm creating and stuff.
No, that's good. I mean, like, that's super nice. And I'm not doing that. So there you go. That's something that's actually in my shadow. So
okay, interesting. Well, I hope it never landed in a bad way from my side. That's just something I want to make sure.
No, I want you to do that.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna be a bit more extreme. But no, like, talking about time, that's something personally I value. And well, if since we're talking about this, I had a problem with this in the beginning. In the beginning, I mean, like, years ago, I was always on time, and when I have a plan with someone, I think I used to feel disrespected when they come late.
Okay.
Like, that's way before. But then it's the same perception about the value. I just understood that we don't value the same things the same way. So I value time that much, because even if I'm not planning anything with people, I would still do the same thing. If I want to go to a cafe at a certain time, I need to be there at a certain time. It's just like how I function. I like having things in order. I'm high on conscientiousness, and this is the way I function, right? And we don't value the same things the same way.
Yeah.
So it's normal. Now I still do this thing of like, okay, I'm just gonna mention it, but I don't have this in the back of my mind that, look at this person like disrespecting me or something like this. That's something I dealt with way before. Now I even sometimes, like, well, the thing that I do with time, and that's just like, I always have this 10 minutes buffer. So I would like calculate, it's going to take me 30 minutes to get there. So I'm going to add, like, I'm going to make it 40 minutes just to make sure that I'm going to go there. If I'm losing a train, like if I'm missing a train or something like this. But sometimes what I do is, okay, I'm going to meet this person in that cafe and I need to work on something by myself. I'm going to go there like 1 hour before, work on my stuff, stay there. That's me being on time, and that's me also like doing other stuff while waiting for the other person.
That's really good.
So, yeah, well, we just have different ways of doing stuff, but be on time next time.
Yeah.
Aslan.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
No, it was very interesting.
I think that was a good break from the shadow integration and stuff, because it's a bit difficult to consume everything in one episode.
You saw an example of a shadow kind of, shadow dynamics, like tiny example. It's not like anything crazy, like, but still very interesting.
It's a good example.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, we want to thank everyone for
thank you guys.
this episode. We're gonna have more episodes coming related to maybe we still need to talk about the shadow, like other aspects.
Of course, yeah.
And I think the next one, or let's keep it a surprise.
Yeah.
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 Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
That's all.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
See ya. Nice.
How was it?
It was really good. I liked it.
I think it was more natural than any other one we've done before.
100%.
You agree?
Yeah, I feel just more. I think I don't know what it is about it. It's like it's just feeling